Many of you remember the resource officer during the Parkland school shooting and how he just drove around in this golf cart and tried to make the claim that he wasn't a coward. He didn't know the shooting was going on. And they said even if you stood outside that building, you heard those gunshots and you heard the screams. But according to him, he didn't notice anything happening. Okay, and we know he's lying. Not only that, ladies and gentlemen, when Nick Cruz was outside of that school, before he even entered the school, he had killed people that were on the outside. So there were bodies out there. And still, this resource officer is talking about he didn't know anything was going on. Yeah, with dead bodies laying around. So, what I think it was, ladies and gentlemen, this man was close to retirement because you could tell he's up there in age. He's not no young dude. And he thought about that. He was like, look, I want to retire. I don't want to lose my life now. And I really believe that was going through his head. But it was a real disgrace. What's the purpose in having a resource officer if a school shooter enters the building and you're not there to protect people? Then it's kind of counterproductive to have you there in the first place. So the deputy who stayed outside during Parkland school shooting faces criminal charges. I knew they weren't going to let him get away with that because, too many white parents were upset. So they weren't going to let him get away with what he did. As bullets ricocheted and bodies fell in the hallway and classrooms at Majority Stoneman Douglas High School last year, Deputy Scott Peterson was outside the building. Instead of storming in after the 19-year-old gunman, he retreated to a position of safety. Yeah, he was only concerned about himself being safe and not any student or teacher or faculty member. He could care less about them. For more than a year after the February 2018 attack in Parkland, Florida, grieving parents have demanded that Mr. Peterson, along with the gunman who killed 17 and injured 17, be held accountable in what would prove to be one of the nation's worst school shootings. On Tuesday, law enforcement responded with a sweeping list of charges that resulted in Mr. Peterson's arrest. His alleged crime, failing to protect the students, which he didn't do at all. Ladies and gentlemen, because this was a majority white student body that was killed, Peterson is going to serve some time. Make no mistake about it. He ain't going to get off the hook for this. Now you're going to see results. Okay, America's long history of mass shootings have brought a variety of responses. Call for tighter gun laws. And remember, they want to arm teachers down there in Florida, which I don't agree with. I really seriously don't. When you start talking about arming teachers, I fear for the life of Black students at that point, because we're always their intended target when they have a gun in hand. Okay, so call for tighter gun laws, civil lawsuits against companies that manufacture guns and firearm components, collective mourning. But Tuesday charges represented a highly unusual case of a lawman arrested for failing to save lives. Around Parkland, whose politically engaged students helped launch a national student movement for more gun control, there was both surprise and satisfaction. Well, you know what? Before the bodies even get in the ground, the gun law opponents always surface. You know, I tell you, one thing I can honestly say, ladies and gentlemen, when it comes down to gun laws and their fight constantly in this country over guns, we have nothing to do with that. In fact, they wrote gun laws, back during the slave code time, they wrote laws to keep weapons away from us. In other words, we will harass you and do anything to you. You better not fight us back. If you fight us back, you're going to jail. That nonsense. But look at what's happening today when we see these mass shootings. Look at what's happening. So, in my opinion, ladies and gentlemen, the mass shootings, this is America's fault. This is the fault of the lawmakers, the fault of the policymakers. You've made it so easy for some of these mentally challenged people to get guns to the point where you can't control it. You can't control this stuff now in America. So this is really their fault. And this is your fault for empowering some people to the point where they feel they're untouchable. America did that. That's what America has done. So when I see mass shootings, I put all the fault on the policymakers in charge of this country. And that's where I'm going to keep putting the blame. I have no comment except to say rotten hell, Fred Gutenberg, who emerged as an outspoken gun control activist after his daughter Jamie died in the attack, wrote on Twitter, "You could have saved someone, the 17 of the 17," Mr. Gutenberg added, addressing Mr. Peterson. "You could have saved my daughter. You did not, and then you lied about it, and you deserve the misery coming your way." Mr. Peterson, 56, who had been suspended in the immediate aftermath of the attack and later resigned. He should not have been allowed to resign. 17 people were killed on his watch over that school. And he got to resign? He should never have been able to resign. He should have been fired. But see, ladies and gentlemen, this points back to that damn police union that will allow someone to be negligent on the job and still resign. If you remember, about 2 years ago, there was a cop that stopped two white people in a car and he said, "Oh, we only shoot black people, right?" Remember that? They let him retire too. See, that's what your police union does. They will allow officers like that to retire instead of doing the appropriate punishment on them. And now you have Peterson. When those 17 people died on his watch, there should be no resigning. He should have been fired and jailed if we were in a just society. But we are not in a just society. We're in this one, ladies and gentlemen. And in this society, the appropriate punishment never come for people like Peterson, not when it really should count. So he faces 11 charges of neglect of a child, culpable negligence, and perjury. He was booked into the Broward County Jail with a bond of $102,000. The 15-month investigation by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement that led to the charges found that the former Broward County Sheriff Deputy assigned as school resource officer to Stoneman Douglas High School did absolutely nothing to mitigate the shooting. The department commissioner, Rick Swearingen, said in a statement, there could be no excuse for his complete inaction and no question that his inaction cost lives, he said. Again, if that was the case, then why did you not do anything about Peterson on the spot? See, this is why people do not believe in the system. The system works like crap. It always works like crap, especially when they got to handle people that look like Scott Peterson. The system in this country runs like crap. Okay, officials determined that Mr. Peterson, as well as Sergeant Bryant Miller, who was terminated on Tuesday, but not charged, neglected their duties. Mr. Peterson was taken into custody after an administrative discipline hearing. Charges were an unusual instance of law enforcement officers being held criminally liable for not protecting the public. Yeah, that is unusual because we know the majority of the time, officers in America are not punished for any kind of negligence. They've made it so where officers, nothing they do is wrong. Everything they do is good. Everything they do makes sense when it doesn't. But like I said, they have elevated police in America to this fraudulent, godlike status. Civil lawsuits have become par for the course following mass shootings in the United States. Families of the victims and survivors themselves use litigation to hold institutions, both public and private, responsible for not keeping people safe, as well as to push for policy change or to collect compensation for emotional and physical trauma or death. You know, that's one thing, ladies and gentlemen. They don't have no problem shelling out money for these deaths as long as they get to keep their guns. As long as the end result is everybody get to keep their guns, they'll gladly shell out this money. To them, that's nothing. It really isn't. But experts say that criminally changing a law enforcement officer for allegedly being um, negligent in his response to a mass shooting is new ground. Mm-mm-mm. But it shouldn't be new ground, ladies and gentlemen. They have let law enforcement in this country run amok for centuries. And every day you're seeing the end result of it. Officers empowered to shoot and kill, and they already know before they pull that trigger, there are no consequences for them. And they got a public that will defend anything they do. This is the first time I have seen somebody so charged like this, said Clifton R. Van Zandt, a former profiler with the FBI and an expert on mass shootings. I think that every police officer, sheriff, and FBI agent understands that you have to go to the threat and stop it. And that we are no longer going to wait for SWAT or set up parameters. Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, you know this is bad. They're showing the man's mugshot. How many people do we see out here and we haven't seen one mugshot? But they are showing you Scott Peterson's mugshot. And I'm telling you, this right here is proof. They're going to throw the book at this man. They're going to throw the book at him because of the lives that were lost. And he was armed. It's not like He was an unarmed officer in the school. This man was armed. He had the same thing that you see cops walking around on the street with. And he didn't make any attempt to stop the shooting. That says a lot. I mean, just the fact that we are seeing his mugshot says a lot right there. Because we know we never see that, ever. Even when they allegedly try to punish officers for killing us unarmed. And they'll say they charge the officer, but they never show you a mugshot. So they are showing you Peterson's mugshot. Definitely a first. Definitely a first, especially for a mass shooting. Okay, so the Department of Law Enforcement says its inquiry showed that Mr. Peterson did not investigate the source of the gunshots, retreated during the shooting while victims were still under attack, and directed other law enforcement officers to remain 500 feet away from the building. So if he instructed them to stay away from the building, he heard those gunshots. Because he tried to say he didn't know anything was going on. He didn't hear anything. So he lied. But if you kept other officers away from the building, then you knew what was going on. The sweeping investigation included interviews with 184 witnesses, along with reviews of video surveillance to piece together what officials acknowledge was a slow and chaotic law enforcement response. Officials added a perjury charge alleging that Mr. Peterson knowingly made a false statement under oath in stating that he did not hear gunshots after he arrived at the 1200 building, which he lied. If you told other officers to stay away from the building, you heard everything. You heard everything. Okay. So he pretty much contradicted himself, ladies and gentlemen, except for the first 2 or 3 shots he heard. The warrant portrayed Mr. Peterson, the only armed guard on campus, as an officer with a wealth of active shooter training who knew the gunman was inside but did not go in to try to stop him as he killed and injured students and staff. It detailed a series of students and faculty who remembered seeing Mr. Peterson outside. Wow. So even when they were being shot at in the building, they could see his ass outside. Woo! Damn. What? Where? He really made himself useless, didn't he? He really made himself useless. Wow. One student, Armin Borghetti, told investigators that during the shooting, he looked out a third-floor window and saw Mr. Peterson standing on the side of the 1200 building with his gun drawn, not really doing anything. Okay, so again, if you didn't hear any gunshots, why do you have your gun drawn outside the building, but not doing anything? He heard the gunshots, y'all. No matter how much he denies it, if you hear gunfire, everybody is going to react to gunfire. Everybody's going to react. You're going to react by retreating or ducking or, staying away 500 feet from the building. You're going to react. So it doesn't matter what comes out of your mouth. All somebody got to do is look at your actions of what you did that day. And that's how they were able to determine that Peterson was lying about not hearing the gunfire. Since he was first interviewed by Broward detectives 2 days after the shooting, Mr. Peterson has said he didn't respond by alerting the police, locking the school down, and evacuating children in the courtyard. There wasn't time to think, Mr. Peterson told the Washington Post. No, so in other words, he wasn't going near that building. He feared getting shot himself. So he decided he wasn't going to go near the building. It just happened, and I started reacting. Yes, he started to react in regards to protecting his own life and no one else. That's all Peterson did. He stayed outside the building to protect his own life. He could care less about anybody else and the screams and the shooting and everything that he was hearing outside of that building. He could care less. So he was not the only one that went down, ladies and gentlemen. If you remember, the sheriff himself, he also went down. In January, Florida newly elected Republican Governor Ron DeSantis suspended the Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel. Now, isn't it ironic that both of their names are Scott Peterson and Scott Israel? Citing neglect of duty and incompetence. He named as his replacement Gregory Toney, a former sergeant with the Coral Spring Police Department. In his new position, Sheriff Toney oversaw an internal investigation of 7 deputies at the department, including Mr. Peterson. Jeff Bell, the president of the Broward Sheriff's Office Deputies Association, expressed concerns about the decision to charge Mr. Peterson, who was not a member of his organization. He argued that prosecutors had adopted a sweeping interpretation of the state's negligence law that could put other officers at risk of charges in the future. So, in other words, Jeff Bell, who's in charge of this association, could care less about the victims. He's only concerned about the officer being protected in the whole thing. And that's the problem right there. Jeff Bell, people like him that are in charge of these associations and unions and stuff, they are the problem, ladies and gentlemen. But here's the actual warrant for Scott Peterson. Okay, so let me just see what they got checked off here. So this, okay, so it's from the state attorney, Michael J. Saltz, Broward County Courthouse, and it just gives the address. But let me just see what they have checked off here for. All right, so they got checked off confession by defendant on active cases, exempt, and okay. Personal victim information in cases of sexual offenses. So it was not a sexual offense. So those are the things they said it wasn't. Witnesses to the murder. All right, so let's go down here. Okay, so this is the actual warrant for the arrest for Scott Ralph Peterson, aka Scott Peterson. It looks so weird with him spelling his last name. I mean, his first name with just one T, Scott. S-C-O-T. All right, so here are the charges: neglect of a child in violation of Florida state statute. Neglect of a child in violation of Florida statute. Okay, culpable negligence in violation of Florida state statute. Perjury when not in an official proceeding, and violating a Florida statute. All right, so they just write a background on what happened about Nicholas Cruz going into the building and shooting up the building. And they're just writing about what happened on February 14th, 2018, and how he had an AR-15 style weapon with magazines, and they actually found that in the building. And Scott Peterson, gave his alibi. They're saying how he was trained in dealing with mass shooting. So what I'll do, I'll leave the link to this affidavit and his arrest warrant right here in the description box for anybody that wants to read through it. Wow. This man is a piece of shit. He really is. He really is. And I have to tell you, if this is an example of what a resource officer in a school is like, then you are definitely wasting your taxpayer money on these guys, for real. But please tell me what you think, ladies and gentlemen. Please leave your comment and subscribe. Don't forget to hit on the notification bell. And I'll see you on the next video. Peace, family.